ladies and gentlemen. It is a truth universally acknowledged, though often forgotten, that life can be exhausting. This exhaustion is not simply physical, though that too can weigh us down. No, it is a weariness that often goes deeper, one that seeps into the heart and soul, rendering us tired in places we do not always know how to address. Yet in the midst of this, there is a singular truth that must be heard. God knows that you are tired. And more importantly, He knows why you are tired, and He knows what it is you truly need. In our modern world, we find ourselves constantly in motion. From the moment our eyes open in the morning to the second we finally lay our heads to rest at night, the demands of life seem relentless. We live in a world that moves quickly, and we are often compelled to move with it. The pace of life is accelerating. Technology, social expectations, the need to succeed, to achieve, and to be more, all add layers of pressure that seem to multiply by the day. This perpetual motion can leave us feeling exhausted, not merely in body but in spirit. It is essential to recognize that the nature of this exhaustion goes beyond physical fatigue. While the body may tire from a day of work or exertion, the mind and the heart bear the weight of a deeper kind of weariness. This kind of exhaustion is driven by the demand to keep up, to continually prove our worth, to stay relevant, and to always be in motion, always striving. We are often told that if we are not moving forward, we are falling behind. We have become so conditioned to think that progress is always linear, always towards something greater, something more, that we can no longer distinguish between true progress and the mere act of keeping up with the relentless tide of life. Yet in this constant rush we forget a vital truth: human beings were not designed to live in perpetual motion. We are finite creatures, limited in our capacities. We were made to rest, to pause, to reflect. And even though we are made in the image of God, who created the world in 6 days and then rested on the seventh, we often fail to heed the lessons embedded in creation itself. We see the Creator take rest after His work, not because He needed it, but because rest is inherent to the rhythm of life. There is a pattern to the way the world works: work and rest, movement and stillness. Yet in our culture we have disrupted that balance. We've embraced the idea that our worth is measured by our productivity, by how much we can accomplish in a given day or week. In this world of constant motion, we are continually bombarded by expectations, both external and internal. Our calendars are filled with commitments, our to-do lists seem never-ending, and even when we accomplish one thing, another task immediately takes its place. Technology, which was once heralded as a tool for convenience and efficiency, has only compounded the issue. Our smartphones, emails, social media, and news feeds are always within reach, ensuring that there is never a moment of true silence or peace. Every second is filled with something: an alert, a message, a notification that demands our attention. We have conditioned ourselves to think that every moment must be filled with action, that stillness is a waste of time, and that if we are not moving, we are falling behind. This exhaustion is not just the result of doing too much, it is the product of doing too much without the necessary balance. We have forgotten how to rest, how to slow down, how to embrace stillness. In fact, many of us feel guilty when we stop, when we take a break, or when we are not constantly striving to achieve more. We've become accustomed to the idea that if we are not always moving forward, we are somehow failing. And so we press on, even when our bodies and minds are telling us to stop. We push ourselves further, trying to outrun the exhaustion, believing that if we just keep going, we'll eventually reach a point where the fatigue will end, where we will feel at peace. But that moment rarely comes. Instead, we are left feeling drained, worn out, and at times utterly overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the world in motion. C.S. Lewis, in his reflections on the human condition, often addressed the dangers of this relentless striving. In Mere Christianity, he writes about the need for humility and the acknowledgement that we cannot do everything on our own. He points out that our modern obsession with progress, our insatiable desire for more, is ultimately a recipe for disillusionment. We strive endlessly, believing that the next achievement or the next success will bring us fulfillment, only to find that it does not. The goalposts keep shifting, and the exhaustion only deepens. Lewis challenges us to rethink our priorities, to recognize that our worth is not found in our achievements, but in our relationship with God, in understanding our place within the created order. The exhaustion of a world in motion also speaks to the broader condition of humanity. We were created for more than the endless cycle of work, achievement, and accumulation. The first chapter of Genesis speaks of a creator who, after creating the world, saw that it was good and then rested. This rest was not a retreat from weakness or fatigue, but a statement that the work was complete and good. And in this we see a pattern, a rhythm. We work, but we rest. We act, but we pause. There is a time for everything under the sun, a time to strive and a time to cease from striving. The very fabric of creation is designed with this rhythm, yet we, in our modern lives, have moved away from it, constantly striving without ceasing. The question, then, is how we can regain this rhythm, how we can reconcile the need to be active with the necessity of rest. Perhaps it begins by acknowledging our limitations, by accepting the fact that we are finite and not meant to bear the burdens of the world alone. Perhaps it involves learning to say no to some things, not out of laziness, but out of a recognition of our need to stop and reflect. It involves learning to embrace the silence, to take moments of stillness, and to trust that in those pauses we are not failing. We are merely taking part in the rhythm of life that God has set for us. In this world of constant motion, it is easy to forget that we are not meant to carry the weight of the world on our own. We are not meant to be always moving, always striving, always achieving. There is a deeper peace, a more profound rest, that comes when we step away from the chaos of life and simply trust that, in the end, it is not our constant motion that will sustain us, but the grace of God, who knows the rhythm of our hearts and invites us to rest. There is a weariness that runs deeper than the physical exhaustion we feel after a long day's work or a week of intense activity. This weariness is of the soul, a quiet and often unnoticed fatigue that grows from the inside out. It is not simply tiredness in the traditional sense, it is a spiritual and emotional exhaustion that can leave us feeling hollow, disconnected, and unfulfilled. The weight of this weariness is heavy, not because we are physically spent, but because the very essence of our being feels depleted. It arises from a deep-seated sense of longing, a yearning for something more, something that the world cannot provide. This weariness manifests in many ways. For some, it comes in the form of a quiet sadness or dissatisfaction that lingers even when everything on the surface seems to be going well. There may be no apparent reason for this fatigue, no clear external cause, but the soul feels tired nonetheless. For others, the weariness may stem from the demands of modern life, pressures to succeed, to achieve, to maintain relationships, to meet expectations. In this context, the weariness can feel like a constant, unyielding burden, one that only grows heavier as the days pass. But the soul's weariness does not always stem from external pressures. Often it is a deeper existential tiredness, a longing for purpose and meaning that cannot be fulfilled by the fleeting things of the world. We may find ourselves striving for success, wealth, recognition, or pleasure, only to discover that these things do not satisfy. The more we chase them, the more we find ourselves empty, as though we are pursuing a mirage that only recedes further into the distance. It is in these moments of striving and failure that the soul's weariness becomes most apparent. We begin to feel that no matter how hard we work, how much we achieve, it is never enough. There is always a sense that something is missing, something just out of reach, leaving us with a lingering ache that cannot be easily named or understood. This kind of weariness can be incredibly isolating. In a world that encourages us to be self-sufficient, to rely on our own strength, the feeling of being tired at a soul-deep level can make us feel vulnerable and weak. We may find it difficult to express this weariness to others, because it does not fit neatly into the narratives of success and achievement that dominate our society. People may understand when we say we are physically tired, but when we speak of the tiredness of the soul, we may find ourselves met with confusion or indifference. After all, how can one explain the weight of spiritual exhaustion, the yearning for something more, in a world that seems to have all the answers? C.S. Lewis, in his reflections on the human condition, spoke often of this kind of weariness. He understood the deep longing that underpins human existence, and he addressed it with compassion and insight. In his book, The Screwtape Letters, Lewis wrote about the ways in which humans are distracted from their spiritual well-being, often by the noise and clutter of modern life. He recognized that the soul's weariness is not just the result of external pressures, but of an inner emptiness that comes from seeking fulfillment in the wrong places. According to Lewis, our deepest hunger cannot be satisfied by anything in the created world. It can only be filled by God. In this sense, the weariness of the soul is a kind of spiritual hunger, a longing for the divine that is woven into the fabric of our being. For many, the exhaustion of the soul is not something that can be fixed through external solutions or material gains. The pursuit of success, status, or possessions may offer temporary relief, but the weariness always returns, often more intense than before. We may try to fill the void with distractions, busy schedules, entertainment, relationships, but these too fall short of providing the peace and rest that our souls truly need. The problem is not that we are searching for fulfillment, but that we are searching in the wrong places. As Lewis so insightfully observed, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. This desire for something beyond the physical world is at the heart of the weariness of the soul. It is a longing for eternity, for the presence of God, for the fulfillment of a promise that lies beyond the fleeting comforts of this life. This recognition that our souls were made for something beyond this world can be both comforting and challenging. On one hand, it offers a sense of hope, because it means that our deepest longings are not futile. There is a purpose to our weariness. It is a sign that we are made for more than this world can offer. Our souls are homesick for their Creator, and this homesickness is what gives rise to our longing. On the other hand, this recognition can be a challenge because it requires us to shift our perspective. It calls us to recognize that no earthly achievement, no material possession, no human relationship can ultimately satisfy the hunger of our souls. Only God can do that. The weariness of the soul, then, is a reminder that we are not home yet. It points us to something greater than ourselves, to a deeper reality that lies beyond the immediate concerns of daily life. In Mere Christianity, Lewis writes that human beings are like a child who has been given a toy and is surprised to find that it doesn't bring happiness. The world cannot satisfy the deepest yearnings of our hearts. But that does not mean these yearnings are misplaced. They point us to the truth that we were made for another world, a world where the weariness of the soul will be no more. Ultimately, the weariness of the soul is an invitation to rest, but not a rest that comes from retreating from the world or avoiding our responsibilities. It is a rest that comes from seeking the presence of God, from acknowledging that we cannot bear the weight of life on our own. It is a call to find fulfillment in something that transcends the fleeting and temporal, something eternal. In this sense, the weariness of the soul is both a burden and a blessing. It is a burden because it makes life feel heavy, but it is a blessing because it points us toward the only one who can lift the weight, the one who promises to give us rest. In our modern world, there is an ever-present cultural narrative that promotes the idea of self-sufficiency. We are taught from a young age that to be truly independent is to be successful, that the highest form of achievement is to rely solely on ourselves. We are encouraged to build our own lives, carve out our own paths, and solve our own problems. This value is deeply ingrained in many aspects of life, from education to career, from personal growth to spirituality. We are told that our worth is measured by our ability to stand on our own 2 feet, to be self-made, to take control of our destinies. But this illusion of self-sufficiency is not only misleading, it is deeply harmful to our well-being. At the heart of the illusion lies the belief that we are capable of carrying the entire weight of our lives without assistance. This belief fosters a sense of pride in our ability to do it all, to maintain control, to overcome every obstacle without the need for help. It suggests that asking for support or guidance is a sign of weakness, something to be avoided at all costs. In a world that glorifies individualism and personal achievement, this mindset creates an unspoken pressure to constantly perform, to push forward regardless of our limitations. Yet beneath this facade of strength lies a profound truth that is often ignored. We are not designed to carry the weight of life alone. No matter how capable or accomplished we are finite beings with inherent limitations. We do not have the strength to bear every burden, nor the wisdom to navigate every challenge unaided. In fact, the very act of trying to be self-sufficient in every area of life often leads to a deeper sense of frustration, exhaustion, and isolation. The more we try to prove our independence, the more we find ourselves unable to cope with the overwhelming demands of life. C.S. Lewis, in his writings, addressed the dangers of this false sense of self-sufficiency. In Mere Christianity, he explores the idea that true strength comes not from doing everything on our own, but from recognizing our dependence on something greater than ourselves, on God. Lewis writes, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." True humility, according to Lewis, is not about devaluing ourselves, but about recognizing that we are not the center of the universe, that we are not self-made, and that we cannot live our lives entirely in isolation. The very idea of being self-sufficient is a denial of our humanity. It is a refusal to acknowledge that we need help, that we need community, and that we were never meant to walk this journey alone. One of the most profound ways in which this illusion of self-sufficiency harms us is in our relationships. In our efforts to maintain an image of independence, we often distance ourselves from others, believing that to rely on others is to admit weakness. We may keep our struggles to ourselves, avoid asking for help, or even push away those who offer support. We convince ourselves that we should be able to handle everything ourselves, that to need others is a sign of failure. But in doing so, we deny the very essence of what it means to be human. We are relational beings, created to live in connection with others, to share our joys and burdens, to lift each other up in times of need. In the Screwtape Letters, Lewis reflects on the subtle ways in which pride, often masked as self-sufficiency, keeps us from experiencing the fullness of human connection. The fictional demon Screwtape instructs his nephew, Wormwood, on how to keep humans focused on their own individual desires and away from the deep relationships they were created for. He emphasizes that the more a person is convinced of their own independence, the more isolated they become, and the less likely they are to seek out meaningful connections with others. This isolation, Lewis suggests, is a key strategy in keeping humans disconnected from God and from each other. The illusion of self-sufficiency also leads us to avoid vulnerability. To be vulnerable is to admit that we do not have all the answers, that we do not have control over every aspect of our lives. It is to acknowledge that we need others, and that is something that many of us are uncomfortable with. Vulnerability is often seen as a weakness in a culture that values strength and independence above all else. However, true strength is found not in the refusal to be vulnerable, but in the willingness to be open and honest with ourselves and others about our needs, our struggles, and our limitations. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open the door to deeper, more meaningful connections with others, and we invite the support and help we truly need. In addition to the personal cost of self-sufficiency, there is also a spiritual dimension to this illusion. Many of us carry the mistaken belief that we must prove ourselves worthy of God's love, that we must work hard, accomplish great things, and be perfect in order to earn His favor. We approach our relationship with God as if it were a transactional exchange. If we do enough good, if we are strong enough, If we manage to live without sin or failure, then God will bless us. But this is a false understanding of grace. The gospel message is not about achieving a level of self-sufficiency, but about acknowledging our utter dependence on God. In Mere Christianity, Lewis reminds us that Christianity is not about self-improvement through our own efforts, but about surrendering to the transformative power of God's grace. It is in admitting our weakness and our need for His help that we open ourselves to the fullness of His love. The idea that we must do everything ourselves is also a denial of the fact that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. We are not isolated individuals fighting to survive in a competitive world. We are members of a community, both human and divine, with responsibilities to each other and to God. The illusion of self-sufficiency blinds us to this interconnectedness, leading us to focus solely on our own needs and desires, rather than the needs of those around us. By refusing to acknowledge our dependence on God and on each other, we miss out on the richness of community and the joy that comes from sharing in the lives of others. Ultimately, the illusion of self-sufficiency is not only a lie, it's a path to frustration and exhaustion. No matter how hard we try to live independently, we will always face challenges and limitations that we cannot overcome on our own. The answer, as Lewis wisely points out, is not in self-reliance but in humble dependence. True strength is found in recognizing our need for others, for community, and for God. It is in surrendering our pride and admitting that we are not enough on our own that we can begin to experience the peace, grace, and love that God offers us freely. The more we embrace our dependence, the more we discover the true freedom that comes from trusting in God's provision and in the support of those around us. In a world driven by immediate results and instant gratification, trusting in God's timing can be one of the most difficult things for us to embrace. We live in an era where everything seems to happen at lightning speed. Information, food, communication, everything is accessible at a moment's notice. This rapid pace has seeped into every area of our lives, including our spiritual lives. We want answers now, and we often feel as though the timing of God's plans doesn't align with our own sense of urgency. Yet the call to trust in God's timing is not just an invitation to wait, it is a profound opportunity to learn patience, to deepen our faith, and to align our hearts with the wisdom of a Creator whose perspective spans far beyond our immediate circumstances. It is important to first recognize that God's timing is not bound by the same constraints that govern our lives. We are finite beings, with a limited understanding of the world around us. Our perspective is narrow, shaped by the events and experiences we have lived through. We see only a small fragment of the larger picture, and our view of time is constrained by the ticking of a clock, the changing of seasons, and the limitations of our own understanding. God, on the other hand, exists outside of time. He is the creator of time, the one who ordains the seasons and the cycles of life. As the psalmist writes, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night." Psalm 94. What seems like an eternity to us is but a moment in the grand sweep of God's eternal plan. His timing is not arbitrary, it is perfect, wise, and purposeful. When we are in the midst of waiting, whether for a job, a relationship, healing, or direction in life, it can be difficult to trust that God is at work behind the scenes. We may question His timing, wondering why certain things are taking so long or why our prayers seem unanswered. This struggle is not unique to our time or culture. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of individuals who wrestled with the timing of God's plan. Abraham and Sarah waited for decades for the promise of a son, and their faith was tested by years of longing and disappointment. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years before entering the promised land, and during that time they faced doubt and frustration. Even Jesus' disciples, who walked with Him on earth, struggled to understand the timing of His mission. Yet, in each of these examples, God's timing was perfect. He had a plan that was far grander than what they could have imagined, and He was preparing them, refining them, and shaping them for the purposes He had set before them. One of the key lessons in trusting God's timing is learning patience. Patience is not simply the ability to wait, it is the ability to wait with hope, with peace, and with trust. It is a practice of surrendering our desires, our plans, and our need for control to the hands of a loving God. In James 5:7-8, we are called to be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Just as the farmer waits for the seasons to bring about the harvest, so we are called to wait for God's perfect timing in our lives. The key here is that the farmer does not hurry the process. He trusts that the seeds he has planted will yield a crop in due time. Likewise, we are invited to trust that God is cultivating something in us, something that will come to fruition at the right moment. However, patience does not mean passivity. Trusting in God's timing does not require us to sit idly by while waiting for things to happen. Rather, it calls us to continue to live faithfully in the present moment, to do the work that God has placed before us, and to trust that He is orchestrating all things according to His will. While we wait, we are still called to be active in our relationship with God, to serve others, to grow in our understanding of His Word, and to pursue the things that He has set before us. This active waiting is not an anxious striving, but a peaceful engagement with the present, knowing that God is working even when we cannot see it. There is also a deep spiritual growth that comes from trusting in God's timing. When we wait for something, whether for a promise to be fulfilled, for a prayer to be answered, or for a season of life to change, our faith is tested. In the waiting, we are often confronted with our fears, our desires, and our doubts. It is in these moments that God refines us, revealing areas of our hearts that need healing and transformation. Waiting for God's timing requires us to confront the truth that we are not in control, and it forces us to lean into His sovereignty. This process, though difficult, deepens our trust in Him. It shifts our focus from our immediate circumstances to the eternal truths of His faithfulness, goodness, and love. Moreover, trusting in God's timing invites us to shift our perspective from short-term fulfillment to long-term purpose. In our fast-paced world, it can be easy to focus on what is right in front of us, the immediate challenges, the desires of our hearts, the goals we want to achieve. However, God's plans for us extend far beyond the confines of this moment. He is not merely concerned with what we want right now. He is shaping us for a future that is far grander than we can comprehend. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." God's timing is not just about when things happen, but about how He is preparing us for the future He has ordained. Trusting in God's timing also means surrendering our desires for control over the outcomes of our lives. Often we want to dictate the terms of how and when things will unfold. We want to be the ones who decide when the answers come, when the doors open, and when the challenges end. But when we place our trust in God's timing, we are acknowledging that He knows best. We are saying that His plan is good, even when it doesn't align with our own expectations. This surrender is not easy. It requires humility and a willingness to release our tight grip on the things we want most. Yet in surrendering we find peace, because we know that the one who holds our future also holds our hearts. Ultimately, trusting in God's timing is an act of faith, a declaration that we believe God is good and that He is working in ways we cannot yet see. It is a reminder that we do not walk this journey alone, but that God walks with us, guiding us, shaping us, and leading us toward His perfect purpose for our lives. In the waiting, we learn that His timing is not a hindrance to our happiness, but a gift that, when fully embraced, brings peace, hope, and a deeper sense of His presence in our lives. In the frantic pace of modern life, the idea of rest often feels like an unattainable luxury. We live in a world where productivity, achievement, and constant motion are celebrated, and rest is often seen as something that only happens when we are too exhausted to continue. The relentless drive to do more, be more, and achieve more leaves little room for the kind of deep rest that refreshes both the body and the soul. In this context, the promise of true rest, as offered in Scripture, stands in stark contrast to the shallow, fleeting rest that the world provides. True rest, according to God's word, is not just a physical cessation of activity, it is a profound spiritual peace that touches every aspect of our being, offering restoration, healing, and renewal in ways that the world cannot provide. The invitation to enter into true rest is one of the most beautiful promises in the Bible. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus offers a call to all who are weary and burdened, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." This passage captures the essence of the rest that Jesus promises. It is not just a momentary respite from life's demands, but a deep, soul-satisfying peace that restores us on a profound level. Jesus' words in this passage suggest that the rest he offers is not like the kind of rest we experience when we sleep or take a vacation. Those forms of rest are important, but they are temporary and often do little to alleviate the deeper weariness of our hearts. The rest that Jesus promises is rest for the soul, a deep, lasting peace that comes from being in relationship with Him. It is a rest that is rooted in trust, surrender, and the quiet assurance that we are not alone in the struggles of life. True rest, according to Jesus, comes from taking His yoke upon us, submitting to His leadership, walking in His ways, and learning from His example. When we do this, we discover that His ways are not burdensome, and His presence brings us a peace that transcends the demands and pressures of the world. One of the key aspects of true rest is surrender. In a culture that prizes self-sufficiency and control, surrender is often seen as a weakness. We are taught to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, to rely on our own strength, and to keep pushing forward no matter the cost. But this mindset often leads to exhaustion, burnout, and a deep sense of discontentment. The more we try to control our circumstances and manage every detail of our lives, the more we realize that we are not in control at all. The promise of true rest, however, invites us to surrender our need for control, to release our burdens, and to trust in the sufficiency of God's grace. This surrender is not about giving up or resigning ourselves to a life of passivity. It is about acknowledging that we were never meant to carry the weight of the world on our own. True rest comes when we lay down our burdens at the feet of Jesus and trust that He is in control, even when we cannot see the way forward. Another important aspect of true rest is the idea of renewal. In Isaiah 40:31 we read, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint." This verse speaks of a strength that is renewed through trusting in God, a vitality that comes from placing our hope in Him. The rest that God offers is not a passive rest, but an active renewal of our spirits. It is a rest that equips us to face the challenges of life with courage and resilience. When we rest in God's presence, we are not only refreshed but also empowered to live out the purposes He has for us. The renewal that comes through true rest is a restoration of both physical energy and spiritual vitality, enabling us to face each new day with hope and strength. True rest also involves healing. Life's burdens, whether they are physical, emotional, or spiritual, can leave us broken, bruised, and weary. We carry the weight of past hurts, disappointments, and failures, and these wounds can prevent us from experiencing the fullness of God's peace. But the promise of true rest is also the promise of healing. In Psalm 23, David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures, He leads me beside quiet waters, He refreshes my soul." Psalm 23:1-3. The image of lying down in green pastures and being led beside still waters is a picture of peace, rest, and restoration. Just as a shepherd cares for his flock, leading them to places of rest and nourishment, so God leads us to places of healing and renewal. When we rest in Him, we open ourselves to His healing touch, allowing Him to restore the broken parts of our hearts and bring peace to our troubled minds. True rest also offers freedom from striving. The world often tells us that we must constantly prove our worth, that we must work harder, achieve more, and earn our place in the world. This mindset leads to exhaustion, as we continually seek to meet expectations that are often unrealistic or unattainable. But the rest that God promises is a rest from striving. In Ephesians 2:8-9, we are reminded that our salvation is a gift from God, not something we can earn through our own efforts, for it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. True rest comes when we stop trying to prove our worth through our achievements and simply receive the gift of grace that God offers. When we rest in His love, we are freed from the constant need to measure up, and we can embrace the peace that comes from knowing that we are already accepted, already loved, and already enough in His eyes. Ultimately, the promise of true rest is an invitation to live in the fullness of God's presence. It is an invitation to lay aside the burdens of anxiety, worry, and striving, and to trust that God is both our Creator and our Sustainer. The rest He offers is not an escape from the challenges of life, but a deep, abiding peace that allows us to face those challenges with faith, hope, and courage. True rest is found not in the absence of activity or struggle, but in the presence of God, who walks with us through every season of life. It is in His presence that we find the peace and renewal that our souls long for. It is when we come to Him weary and burdened that He offers us rest, true rest that restores, heals, and empowers us to live for His glory.